Yeah, well, I was a scientist, so I studied engineering to start with, and then I didn't really want to get a job, so I went on to do a PhD. So it's basically laziness, and that was mathematics. And I was always, when I was younger, I have a brother who's 2 years younger than me, and he's the complete opposite. So I was very clever and in my head, and he was deaf in one ear, and they didn't realise, so they thought he was stupid, and he wasn't. And so he just retreated into his body, and he was a very good fighter, great at sports and everything. And part of me always saw him as something less than I was, but I secretly knew that he was actually a superior being, because I just felt his energy. His energy was better than mine. Yeah, and so all the way through my training at college in engineering and mathematics, I had this nagging feeling that I was somehow missing the point. Yeah? And so I thought maybe I wasn't being creative. Yeah? And so I started playing the saxophone, and I became proficient enough to sort of perform in London and everything. And but then I became disaffected with that as well, and so I just thought, I'll try something physical. Yeah? And Tai Chi was the least physical thing I could think of. Yeah? And it was also realizing, being at the university and just realizing just how poor the people's energy was, the other academics. Yeah? They were bitchy, they were petulant, they were weak physically, they had no real spirit, and their energy was just poor compared to natural athletes, who people at university generally consider to be lesser people because they're not as clever. And so I went along, and there was a really nice feeling in the building, and so I decided to join up. And I think it was when I went with my girlfriend at the time, Gillian McGregor, and I think it was when John came into the room, and he looked so strange, because he had these big, thick spectacles on with very thick glass and black rims, but he was just totally extraordinary, and I just knew that it didn't matter how long I lived, I was never going to meet anyone like that again. And so I just knew it was either now or never. I either studied with this man or I rejected that whole side of reality. And so I just kept going, and we had already arranged that after 3 months we were going for a holiday to New Zealand, and so I had to stop doing Tai Chi for a couple of months. But then when I came back, I started again and got into it full time pretty much. So then I was going to classes like 5 days a week and practicing between 4 and 8 hours a day. And I just made this promise to myself I wouldn't let anything in my life get in the way of Tai Chi. And so I think in the 25 years I was with John, I think I missed 2 classes. And one was when my son was born. And so it was just like a total career change, really, from this head trip into an energy trip. But it took a very long time to get out of my head, because I was still trying to understand the Tai Chi and the energy aspect in terms of my intellectual capabilities. I think most creative pursuits are. It's so difficult to do them selflessly, because it's like it always comes back to an image of you that you have of yourself. This is the good thing about Tai Chi. It's no one else sees it. My students see it, but they certainly don't see what I do when I'm on my own, because I wouldn't show that to anyone. And so that's for me. That's for me to look at myself and confront myself. And this creative stuff, writing or poetry or writing on the blog, in a way, it's just ways of me spinning words together in such a way that they create a little bit of energy. And so it's those moments of something coming out. And that happens very rarely, but with John, it was all the time. When you're around John, every moment, the truth is spilling out of him. That's the amazing thing about him, yeah. And it's because his energy is just so damn good, yeah. And because he's not inhibited, he's not held back by convention or whatever, yeah. I think with all these things, the truth isn't so much in what is being said, it's what's being evoked, yeah. And I think, this is why someone can read it and feel nothing, and someone else can read it and it can change their life, yeah. And it's because with the person who's prepared to change, will somehow it'll just come alive in them, yeah. And so basically, what it means, there's a transmission. In John's words, there's a transmission. In mine, there isn't. There's just cleverness, yeah, or turn of phrase or whatever, yeah. And so, it was so obvious when I was, he would just sink into himself, and words would just come out, and I knew they were coming from nowhere. They weren't coming from his mind. When a normal person uses words, they come from their mind. They're a total expression of this part of their being. With John, they were bubbling through him out of the ground, yeah. But it's still, there's always this sense that I have that everything I am and everything that I know is from him, yeah. And so he always used to say, I can't remember how he used to put it, teacher for a day, father for a lifetime, yeah. So someone gives you a real teaching for just a moment, and then you have a whole lifetime of dedication to that. You can't get away from it, yeah. And this is the thing with John. And so everything that and it's quite interesting, because everything that I do that seems to contradict him, or everything that I discover that I think, oh well, John never told me that, and so something inside me thinks negatively or whatever, it always reverses. So I think, well, actually he did tell me, I just didn't listen, or he told me in a way that I couldn't hear, yeah. Or he assumed I already knew, but he did actually tell me, yeah. And because in a sense, I have this belief that, for most people, truth is like a veracity. It's like, something is true if it's verifiable, yeah. But for me and for John, truth was a matter of spirit, yeah. So truth is always something that is actually under the surface, that is totally rare and totally non-available, that is wanting to break through all the time, take you by the throat and almost choke you to death, yeah, wake you up, yeah. And so this is, for me, is what John was. John was the representative of the truth in the way that a priest should be, but they aren't, yeah. They just represent Jesus' words, yeah. And even what's happened to him, even his fall and breaking all his bones, it's still beautiful, and it's still making him more beautiful, even though he's crippled, yeah. Because it's all because of his belief and his attitude to the truth, yeah. For him, it is everything, yeah. And he lives that sort of life, and then it doesn't matter what happens to him. He could die tomorrow; it will still be the truth, yeah. And that's, for me, that's just it's the way we should all be living, yeah. But we can't, because we don't have the energy and we don't have the karma, but we can try. And if we try, then we'll get the energy someday, and we'll cleanse our karma sufficiently to be able to live like that, yeah. And so he gave me the world, really, and he showed me a different way of seeing everything, and living, yeah. I always, even when I was studying with John, all the time, I had this feeling that there were things that I needed to know and needed to learn that he couldn't teach me. And he used to say that as well. He'd always say, at some point, Steve, you're going to have to go and find another teacher, because there are things that I can't teach you. No teacher can teach you everything that you need, yeah? And so I was always very conscious of that. And John said to me a long time ago, he said, there will come a point in your Tai Chi where you have to live in exile, yeah? And basically that's what this is. And what's been taken away is the whole structure of the support that is illusory, yeah? The support of the culture, the support of the family, the support of the language, yeah? All of that has gone. So it's up to my own devices and my own ability to actually connect with the person in terms of energy and spirit, yeah? And also just it's basically almost like a self-corrupting situation. When you becoming high up in an organisation, very quickly you become corrupt because you start believing everyone's admiration of you, and really it means nothing. All it means is that they're stupid enough to think good things about you. Yeah? And so that's the good thing about Israel, is that no one thinks anything of me. Yeah? As far as they're concerned, I'm just this non-Jew, yeah, who's who's doing a little bit. And as far as they're concerned, I'm an idiot for devoting myself to Tai Chi rather than making money. Yeah. And so, but you know, they come and study with me because I give them a nice experience or whatever. But they don't admire me at all. You know. And I think that's very important for a teacher in a way, to go through at least a few years of that, of being just a complete non-entity, but still having to work. Yeah. And so really, it's just a process of slowly becoming disillusioned, you know, in the good way, not in the sense of becoming depressed because of it, but getting rid of your illusions so that a life built on spirit can take its place. Yeah, you know, losing your self-image and losing this constant desire to convince yourself that what you're doing is worthy and better than what other people are doing somehow. Yeah. So just because I'm a PhD that's devoting myself to Tai Chi, it doesn't make me a better person. Yeah. And in fact, people who are like, you know, a really good father who's devoting himself to his children, in a way that he's a far better person than I ever will be. Yeah. And or I have this guy I work with who's very religious. He's a very religious Jew, and every time I put my hand on his body, I just know I can never replicate that quality of energy as long as I live. You know? And I always say to him, I hope in my next life I'm religious like you, because I know that's what I need, but I just can't believe in that way. You know? So that's what Israel is for me, really. Yeah. And I know that at some point it will have lost that, and then I'll have to move on. No, I got sick of it. I got sick of, because there's something not right in that sort of support. The sort of support you get from a teacher, you only need it for a certain amount of time, and if you don't grow out of that quite, you know, within a few years, then basically you're a wanker, and the teacher should throw you out. And if the teacher's good, he can feel that and disrupt something, and turn the student round a bit. But there'll always come a point where, and it's always just basically because the student has got too big for their boots. They've just become a little bit too arrogant. They think that because they've been doing it for 20 years or 10 years, that they're better than someone that just comes off the street. Yeah, and it's never the case, as John always used to point out. Yeah? If I got someone to come off the street, they would be able to do this just as well as you. Yeah? Because it's not about skill; it's just about being open. And a complete beginner is always more open than someone that's been doing it 20 years. This is why they have the saying, keep the beginner's mind. Yeah? And so the complete beginner doesn't know what to expect, so they're open to every occurrence. The advanced student thinks he knows exactly what's going to happen next, and so he's just not open. Yeah? And it's magic, but it's nothing special. Yeah? And I think I think this is, in a sense, was John's weakness. You know, he thought too much of himself. You know? So it's like he always used to say to me, the thing I need to work on, he needs to work on, which he can't, is humility. Yeah? And so he thought he was the bee's knees, and it gave him great confidence, enabled him to do amazing things. But ultimately, it holds you back. Yeah. And so it's like there is magic, but the magic is just in your ability to be what I call a ventral, your ability to be present in such a way that spirit is being encouraged to come out and inform the situation all the time. You're not suppressing spirit, which is what most people do. You know? They don't realise they're doing it, but simply by being alive and present, they are suppressing spirit because they have force of habit behind them. Yeah? So what we want to be is open and relaxed and encouraging to spirit so that it can bubble through and possibly kill us, who knows, yeah? But that's better than being dead in the other way, which is living a habitual life. Yeah? If you ever want to be free of your teacher and free of the of the teacher's magic, which you have to be free of, because you have to find your own magic, then you have to practice, yeah. And without it, there's nothing, yeah. It's the one thing that any Tai Chi master will agree on, that basically the student has to practice, yeah. And just not always doing what you want to do, and also about making sure that you don't give yourself a choice. Yeah? I think that's what's wrong with most people nowadays. They believe that somehow, because they have freedom of choice, they have freedom. Now, for a spiritual person, freedom of choice is the death of spirit. Yeah, you have spirit when you realise there is no choice. Yeah, when there's only one thing to do. As soon as you're given a choice, you dither. Yeah, part of you thinks, oh, should I do that? Shouldn't I? And then the moment is lost. Yeah. If you have no choice, then your spirit just comes out. Where else can it go? Yeah? And so you have to do your practice knowing that there's nothing else to do. You have no choice. Yeah? And the time needs to be filled in that way. Yeah? And so John always used to say, the struggle is to become a good student. The good student is someone who practices without choice. Yeah? He doesn't give himself the option of not practicing. Yeah? The mediocre student is someone who practices sometime and then sometimes will forget it, yeah. And the poor student is basically someone that even if they do practice, they'll be practicing what they want to practice, not what the teacher told them to practice, yeah. Yeah, without that, as John would say, I would just be a turd, yeah. But the one thing you can't have both in your life at the same time is the internal and the external. So you have to make a choice. You don't have to make it straight away. There'll be some point in your life where you have to realise that if every time I go into the external, it damages my relationship to the internal. Yeah? But every time I go into the internal, I enter this world that is completely limitless. Yeah? And you have to not care that that's turning you into an antisocial, obnoxious bastard. Yeah? That shouldn't even concern you. Yeah? Because you become so enamoured of this path, yeah, and so that's basically the choice that someone has to make eventually. But it's just getting to the point of making that choice. Yeah, that's the thing.